Better. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I first joined the other woodworking club, I attended a turning demo, and it was done by Pete Schulteis, who I think a lot of you know. And he did a segmentation demo, which really appealed to me because I was basically a woodworker, and I have a shop full of tools, so doing segmented turning lets me use all the tools I have. This was the book that he recommended. Woodturning was Ray Allen. And at his demo, he gave us some handouts. He had drawn a simple vessel using graph paper. And being a high school math teacher, he gave us all the formulas to calculate the angles and the dimensions and figure out how much wood you need. But time's gone by, and now there's computer programs that you can use to do this sort of thing. So I'm going to do a screen share, and I'll show you a couple of programs. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these. That could be a demo in itself, but I'll just show you what's capable with computer work. All right, this is called 3D Design Pro. This is basically just to create a rough shape. You're not worried about any kind of dimensions. So when you're in the editing mode, you're going to put little dots on the screen. The left side of the screen is the center of your vessel. You just have to draw half of the piece.
I'm not, oh, there it is, okay.
Yeah, so as you place dots on here, your shape starts to appear on the screen.
Oh.
And you have to do the inside and the outside. Once you have a rough shape created, you can edit the shape with a different tool. It's called the Move tool. I can grab any of these dots and spread them around, and it'll instantly change the shape on the 3D image. And with this image, you can rotate it and look at it from any angle. Now, once you're happy with the shape here, you export this to another program. I'm not going to bother exporting this one. It's not particularly nice, but I'll see if I can open up another program for you.
Is the program available online?
Yes, it is. It's from woodturnerpro.com. The one I just showed is a free program, and he has several others that are paid. This one is a paid program. I think $79. You can download a free trial for 30 days. If you want to use it after 30 days, you have to pay the fee. So I'm just going to open up a sample project that came with the program. Now, once you import your image or use one of their samples, you can modify it. You can put in the dimensions. You can put in the height you want it to be, the maximum diameter you want the largest ring to be. You enter the thickness of the wood you're working with, the number of segments you want. You can change the different species of wood if you want to see what different colors will look like. You can alternate segments. They don't all have to be the same color. You can mix and match. And once you get it designed to your liking here, you can view it in different aspects. This is front view. This is a cutaway view. You can see how all the pieces overlap. You can go to a ring view. This happens to be the solid bottom piece. You can look at, let me go back to here. I'm going to select a different line here. On this row, you can look at the actual ring. You can look at a single segment. It gives you the dimensions. If you had a pattern set up where you had different colored woods on each segment, you can rotate the piece and see how it looks all the way around. Once you get everything set up and you're happy with the piece, you can go in here and it gives you a cutting diagram. It gives you every ring number, how wide each board has to be ripped on the table saw, the thickness, the number of segments you need, the angle you have to cut the segments at. It tells you how much wood you need to make each ring, and I always add a few extra inches so I don't get my fingers too close to the blade when I'm cutting. And this is basically a spreadsheet. You can print it out and have that with you when you're making the piece. Okay. I'll just show you a couple that I made. This was actually in Wood Magazine a few years ago. They gave the plans for building this. It's just red oak and mahogany, and it gives a basket weave design.
Cool.
Very nice.
And I made this about a year and a half ago. You may have seen this at a meeting already. This is maple. This was just a maple board from Lowe's and some yellow heart and purple heart on the feature ring.
Can you lay out that feature ring on those, in that application?
Not in that application, but he has another program for doing feature rings, but it's more geometric shapes and not things that look like particular objects. So I didn't bother buying that one. He called it Lamination Pro. You can glue, in the virtual program, you glue different kinds of wood together. You can make cuts, rotate the pieces, glue them back together, make more cuts, so you can come up with intricate geometric shapes, but not something that looks like a bird or a sailboat or a house or whatever.
In the Ray Allen book, Jim, doesn't that, there's some plans in there with detail on the design ring.
Right, he was influenced by the Southwest Indian pottery, and a lot of his designs are based on that. And he does have instructions in there for doing feature rings.
Jim, how long did it take you to master that computer program, that Woodturner Pro? Was it something that guys that aren't real computer savvy could get the hang of it?
Actually, he has another program which I didn't buy called Segment Pro, which is geared toward people who are not quite computer savvy.
Okay.
So if you go to woodturnerpro.com, he has 4 different programs. The one that first one I showed you was free. The other 3 I think are $79 each, but he has bundled where you can buy 2 or 3 together and save a few bucks. And you also
Are there any tutorials in there or anything?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He has some video tutorials as well, and there is a forum if you have questions. But it's really not that difficult to learn. You just got to play around with it a little bit. It's mainly
Say the name again? Woodturner what?
woodturnerpro.com.
And you'll see all the different stuff they have available.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good. That's great. Thank you.
He has software available, and then there's later in my demo, I'm going to show you some hardware that he also sells.
Did you hear that, John?
Yep.
Tell him thanks for Sandy.
Sandy could handle it, no problem.
Now, when I cut segments, the first thing I made was this sled. And this is dedicated to just one angle. This will do an 11¼ degree angle, and it makes 16 segments. And I'm going to switch to another camera so you can see how this works. So this has 2 runners that go in the miter slot on the table slot. I've got a stop block here. And I've got my blade set up so that it's just a little higher than the piece of wood as it goes through. To make your first cut, you just need to cut the angle on the end here. Now I have my first angle cut. I'm going to turn the piece and put that angle against the stop block. And I've already measured from the blade to the stop block for the length of the segment that I want. And I actually made a mistake. I cut it in the wrong direction, so this is wasted.
While he was doing it, I was saying to myself, he's got to flip that over.
Right. The next sled I show you is the wedgie sled. That's what I've been using, and you don't have to flip the board over. So I've gotten out of practice on this one.
How do you determine the distance of the stop block?
That's what it should look like.
The circumference,
Excuse
the
me?
circumference of the piece divided by the number of segments.
Right, so this is for 16 segments. It's 11 1/4 degrees on this side and 11 1/4 on this side. If you add those two together, you have 22 1/2 degrees. If you make 16 of these, 16 times 22 1/2 gives you your full circle, 360 degrees. Now, this sled, as you saw, you have to keep flipping the board back and forth, and it's dedicated to one angle. And I spent a lot of time getting this set up right. I screwed the fence down, and I tacked this end with a brad nail, and I made a test ring. I cut all the rings, clamped them together. There were gaps. I had to pull the nail out, adjust the fence, tack it down again, make another test ring. I did that 3 or 4 times until I got a ring that was perfect when I clamped it together. Then I screwed the fence down, and this is dedicated to just that one angle. And then a couple of years ago, I was looking on YouTube and I came across the wedgie sled. My version of it. The original wedgie sled had curved pieces, curved slots, and fixed slots, and the fences could be moved any angle. But routing those curves with a trammel base on your router can be a little difficult. I came across this, which is just 2 dados and some T-track, and you put slots in the fences. Now I can adjust the fences to any angle.
Good idea. Yeah.
And in order to set the fences, you buy these, which are called wedgies, and you can get that on the Woodturner Pro website. They sell these individually, or you can buy a set. I think these 4 came to about 50 bucks. I have one for 16, one for 32, 24, and 12. And they have quite a few other sizes as well. So to set this, you just place the wedgie on the sled, bring your fence up to it and lock it in place. Bring your other fence up and lock it in place. And what I like to try and do is get the wedgie parallel to the edge of the board, which would be the edge of the blade. The beauty of this is that you don't have to cut the same angle on both sides. You can cut one angle on here and one angle on here, but if you're using the wedgie, those 2 angles are still going to add up to 22 1/2 degrees. So even if you're not quite square when you put this in, you'll still get a perfect ring. And to use this sled, I take out this. I made another one which has a little ramp on the side to make the pieces slide off, keep them away from the blade. And for my stop, instead of that toggle clamp I had on the others, I just made this, which fits over my miter slot. Now with this, you have 2 fences. You make your first cut, you just move to the other fence and make your second cut. You just keep going back and forth. You don't have to flip your board over. This is a little thicker. I have to raise the blade up a bit. So I'm going to make my first cut, and then I'll show you how I set up the fence. To make my next cut, I need to put a stop block here so I can set the size and then move through and make my cut and keep repeating that over and over. I found out the hard way, if I just measure from the blade to the stop block straight across, and then I cut all my segments, the segments are actually coming out slightly longer than what I wanted. And I realized it's because I'm cutting on an angle, not 90 degrees to the blade. So to compensate for that, you could do some math. You could multiply the length you want times the cosine of the angle that you're cutting, but I don't like doing all that math. So I came up with an easier way without doing math. I just make my first cut, then I'll mark where I want my second cut to be. I'll line that cut line up with the blade. I'll bring my stop block in and lock my fence down. So now I can make the cut. So very quickly, you can cut segments that are all exactly the same size, and you have no problems gluing them together. And once the segments are cut, there'll be a little bit of fuzzy stuff on the edges. You can just sand those off. You don't want any of the fuzzies folding over and then getting stuck in the glue joint. One thing I should have mentioned with the wedgie sled, when you make your cuts, it's a good idea to draw a line down the middle of your board. The reason you do that is because if you're not perfectly centered when you put that wedgie in, you may have two different angles, and you want to put the two angles together. So you'll have all the segments with lines on one side and no line on the other side. And when you put them together, you're going to alternate, line up, line down, line up, line down. That way the two angles that are glued together add up to the 22.5 degrees. All right, let's try gluing this up. I like doing this on a piece of melamine. It's nice and flat, and if you get glue on here, this wipes off very easily. And I use tape when I glue these up. The tape acts like a hinge, which lets me make the ring very quickly.
People have a pinky?
So as I'm putting them in, I'm alternating the lines, line on one side, line on the other side.
Do you have to do that, or you could put the lines on the same side?
It's possible if I didn't set the jig up properly that this may be off a little bit. I may have 1 degree more on one side and 1 degree less on the other. So I want to put it together alternating so that that error cancels itself out. And the two angles that are getting glued together will add up to 22.5 for a 16 segment ring.
Hello? No problem. No.
Okay, I like using Type Bond 2. This sets up pretty quickly. And I just have to put the glue on one side of each segment.
So Jim, by using that wedgie sled, you don't have to dry fit and clamp it to check for any light between the joints? Is that good?
The first time I used the wedgie sled, I did that. I did a test ring. And I dry fit them together. And I held it up to the light. This has no glue on it and there's no gaps.
Awesome.
So I'm confident enough to use this without having to do a test.
Nice.
And I just take a glue brush from Rockler and I spread it out just on one surface.
Jim, I use a wedgie sled, but I made it with the curved lines in it, and just like you said, I find that it's like dead accurate, and I've tried the same thing, putting the pieces together and clamping it, and they're all perfect.
Now I'm going to use a hose clamp to clamp this together. I used to buy hose clamps that in different sizes, and sometimes I'd have to put two together to get the diameter that I needed. I found these at Lowe's. They're in the heating duct area. They come two to a package, and they have a quick release. You just lift the screw up, and you can adjust the size very quickly. And it can go from a very small diameter, I think, down to about an inch, up to over 12 inches with one clamp.
What department did you say that was in?
Where they sell the heating ductwork,
Oh, okay.
heating and air conditioning ductwork.
Mm-hmm.
Two in a package, I think they're $5. And they're more than large enough. My lathe is a midi lathe. The largest I can do is 12 inches. So this is plenty big enough. I just need one clamp for every ring that I do. I don't have to start joining them together. So once I have it taped up, I use the tape as a hinge. I can roll it up, join the end together. And I push down on everything to make sure they're seated. This is what I like. I can tighten the clamp almost perfect, push the screw down, and then just tighten it up. I don't know if you can see that, but it's no gap.
Beautiful.
And with the melamine, you can just wipe the excess glue off and you're ready to go for the next piece. And even if the glue dries on here, just take a spackle knife. You can scrape it, it pops right off.
You wipe the glue off the piece dry, not with a wet.
I just wipe it off dry. The next step I'm going to show you, I'm going to put it on the lathe and I'm going to turn it to make it flat, and that'll take off any of the excess glue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is like a cooking show. This is one that's already finished. I did this a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's real quick drying glue, Jim.
Yep. Let's type on 4.
That's the fun part, taking that tape off.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not going
It
to.
doesn't matter, you can turn it off.
I'm not going to make you watch me take the tape off. But this is all glued up and ready to go for the next step. Even though I pushed down on it, there are some slight variations, but very slight. And I need to make this flat on both sides before I glue it together to the other rings. And there are several methods. You could just take a piece of sandpaper on a flat surface and do it by hand, but this is really tedious. If you have a big disc sander, you could hold it against the disc sander, flip it over, sand the other side. The problem with that is if your pressure is off a little bit, you may not get the two sides parallel. You may have one side a little thicker and one side thinner. So the next method is to do it on the lathe, and I'm going to switch cameras to the lathe.
There it is.
Can you still hear me over here?
Yep, yep.
And when I went to Pete Schulteis's demo, he had a faceplate and a piece of scrap wood, and he put two-sided tape on here. And he just took his ring and stuck it on the two-sided tape, put the tool rest up, and he very lightly touched it with a tool. And it worked great for him, but when I did it, it popped off and flew across the shop. And I ended up with this. You're gluing end grain to end grain, so it's not a very strong joint. And when it landed on the floor, it just broke apart. Once you glue two rings together, you overlap the joints, then you've got a nice strong joint. So I found out I was using two-sided carpet tape, and I learned that there's two-sided woodworking tape like this, which is much, much stronger. But the problem with using tape is it gets sawdust on it, and it loses its stickiness after a while. So my next attempt was using these. And this worked much better. There's no tape to change. But you just go back and forth. You're not trying to change the dimensions and shape. You just want to smooth it all out. When you think you've got it close, take a straight edge, put it across, and look for gaps. And at this point, I don't have any gaps. So the last step is to sand this side. I've got a flat piece of wood with some sandpaper. I think this is 220. I just give it a light sanding. Now that I've got a flat side, I can reference that against the chuck. And I can flatten this side as well. The only drawback I found with this is that when you're doing a vessel, you have different size rings, and after a while, you'll expand the doors as far as they go. You may have a ring that's too big to fit in here. Then you have to unscrew 8 of these buttons, move them to the next hole, screw them back in again, and that can get to be tedious. On occasion, I've actually closed the drawers up and I put the buttons on the inside and expanded. But you have to be really careful doing that, because if you put too much internal pressure, you'll blow the ring apart. So by far the best way to do it is with a drum sander. And I made a drum sander attachment for my lathe. I think, Pete, you did your demo about a year ago on turning, on segmented turning. And I attended your demo, and you brought your homemade drum sander. And I actually started building this one the day before your demo. I'm just going to take the dust hood off so you can see what it looks like. I made the drum out of some MDF. I cut circles, 5-inch circles on my bandsaw with a jig, circle cutting jig. I drilled 1-inch holes through all of those discs. I put some glue on each disc and threaded it onto a 1-inch galvanized pipe. And then at this end, I screwed on a faceplate, which is attached to the headstock. For the tailstock, I just have a live center going into that galvanized pipe. Then I put some sticky back Velcro onto the drum. And then I have sandpaper, which is also Velcro. And the table has a hinge on the front and an adjustment knob on the back to raise it up. Excuse me?
No, I got the ticket right there. Let me check.
So now when I want to sand the disc, I just have to adjust the height of the table so it just barely engages the wood. And it's important, this is rotating counterclockwise. If I fed it through from the front, it's just going to fling it across the room. You have to feed it from the back. I'll run it through once without the dust cover. And you just keep doing that until you put your straight edge on and you've got it flat. I normally do it with the dust cover. This is a very messy operation. I have this hooked up to my shop vac and I have a remote control to turn it on. Okay, so now we've got flat rings. And we'll switch back to the other camera. Okay. And the next step is gluing your rings together. And the problem here is that if you put glue on the surface of this ring, and you try to clamp it up, it's going to move around. That glue is slippery until it gets starts to tack up. And you want all your glue joints to line up, so you don't want it slipping out of line. So when I saw Pete's demo, he put little wooden cleats on one of the rings. He used hot glue to attach wooden cleats. He did a test fit first. There we go. He did a test fit. He made a witness mark on each disc so we can line them back up again. He had all the glue joints staggered, so the center of this segment lines up with the glue joint of the one above. The cleats prevent it from twisting, and it's easy to glue up. You can put the glue on here, put this back on, put in a press. I have one here. Not actually going to glue this up, but it'll give you the idea. Once I have glue on here, just tighten the press up. Tight bond tacks up in about 2 or 3 minutes, so it doesn't really need to be in the press for very long. This method works okay, but you have to make all these little cleats and they're single use. Once you put this on the lathe, you're going to turn them away. And no matter how careful I am, I always end up burning my fingers with the hot glue. So I was on the internet and I found something called a segment stopper, and I'll show you that next. That's for aligning and gluing up rings. It's going to be another camera. Ring. Okay, can you hear me over here?
Yes.
Okay. This is called a segment stopper. I did a homemade version first, which they show how to do on that Woodturner Pro website. I bought a Rainbird sprinkler head from Lowe's. I unscrewed the top. I took out the water pipe that pops up to sprinkle the lawn, and I also took the spring out. There's a piece of PVC pipe with a cap glued on the end. You drop the spring in, then you put the water pipe in. And then on top is a furniture fitting. I bought a 10-pack of these from Amazon. I had to drill a hole in here. This is for making PVC furniture and attaching legs. So I drilled a hole in here for this pipe.
Jim, what are those things again?
Which things?
The yellow thing.
These are fittings for making PVC furniture.
Oh, okay.
If you want to make a PVC table and attach legs to it. So I had to buy a 10-pack. I only needed one. So I've got a bunch left. If anybody wants one of these, you can have it. So I made this for a few dollars, and it has a spring inside. You have to mount this on a board with a hole in it, and I'll show you how it works. I did, after using this one, I did buy the one from the website, and I found out that my homemade one is just as good as the $50 one from the website. So you can probably make this for about half that price. So,
Assembly rings.
So I have it mounted here. They had a blue piece on the bottom, but I drilled a hole in a piece of plywood. I put a couple cleats on the end, and I can hold it on my bench with the vise. The other part of the system I bought from the website, which is a modified Longworth chuck. It only has 4 points on it, and it's just used for centering. It's not for holding the way you would on the lathes with 8 points. So this fits over the pipe. I'm going to take my ring, drop it over the pipe, and when I rotate the chuck, the ring is now centered on the pipe. The next part is a faceplate screwed to a waste block. I've already glued one ring on. I'll show you how I glue the next one on. I mounted this on my lathe, and I drilled a recess in the bottom, which is the same diameter as the pipe. So now I can fit this on top of the pipe. This is now centered on the pipe as well as the ring. I put glue on the ring, push this down, turn it around a little bit to spread the glue, and I just make sure my glue joints in the upper one are lined up with the pencil lines on the center of the segment down below. No hot glue, no little cleats, very quick and easy. And then to hold it in place, I have a 25-pound weight. On the website, the guy said you can use 5 or 10 pounds. I didn't think that was going to be enough, so I went with 25. So let's actually glue this up. You can see how quick it goes.
Jim, just what is that plastic ring on the base called one more time?
It's a Longworth chuck.
Lo-
Long, Longworth. I'm going to send Barry Duchin a list with all the websites and the names of these different items, and he can put it in the newsletter.
Thanks.
Did that come with the jig?
You can buy the chuck separately, or you can buy the
Gift certificate.
or you can buy the stopper and the chuck together at a bit of a discount.
Jim, you don't have any problem with it turning sideways, like losing your centering by, turning it in clockwise or counterclockwise when you glue it up?
Nope, I'm going to put it in. I'll center it. I have a line marked on the center of 4 of the segments, so I can use that to align the other piece. So this is now centered on the pipe. I balance this on top in the hole, and I put the weight on. Then I'm just going to twist it back and forth a bit. That spreads the glue around. And now I'm going to check my alignment with the glue joints of the upper ring and the pencil lines on the lower. And we're good. So Typon 2 sets up pretty quickly. I'll leave this in here for 2 or 3 minutes. When I take the weight off and take it out, I won't be able to turn those rings. And then I'm ready to glue up the next piece. And I'm not bothering with those little cleats and the hot glue. So this is just a test piece. I'm not going to let it sit for too long. I have one other piece I want to show you. You can see it's already glued. There's another attachment they sell. It's called a Seg Easy plate. This is for doing open segmented work. They sell these plates in different diameters and with different numbers of segments, and they have these raised lines between. You can place your segments in here to do an open segmented piece.
Clever.
I didn't make 16, I just did a few as a sample. But these are all perfectly spaced. You put that over your post. Now you've got perfectly spaced segments centered on the post. And you do the same thing. You've got a waste block, a hole drilled in the center. I've already glued a couple rings on. You put glue on here, balance this, push it down. You can actually put a rubber band around these outside ones to hold them in place, but then you put your weight on top and you're all set.
Do you keep the weight on there until it's totally dry?
No, I'll leave the weight on for 2 or 3 minutes until it gets set up. You know, I mean, this is
Okay.
already set up. It's
Oh,
not
okay.
glued. So now I'm actually ready to glue another ring on here, 2 or 3 minutes, take it off, glue another ring on. So I can pretty quickly build a vessel out of this.
Mhm.
If you're turning something large, like that big vase that I showed you, I make it in 2 sections. And I'll put one section on the lathe. I'll turn down the inside. I'll put the other section on the lathe, turn down the inside of that one. Then I'll glue the 2 halves together and turn the outside. I don't have one put together to go on the lathe yet, but I think you have an idea of how that part works.
So the waste block with the faceplate on it is attached to your bottom ring,
Right,
so that you can keep building and then turn that off at the end.
right.
Okay.
And if you want to put your a solid piece of wood on here, which will be the bottom of your vessel, if you want to build from the bottom up, instead of drilling a hole in your bottom, I would hot glue on a scrap piece of wood and drill my recessed hole into the scrap piece and put it on. Then when I go to turn it, I'll just pop that scrap piece off and I won't have a hole in the bottom of my vessel. Okay, let me switch to the other camera and we'll do some questions.